Subterranean, it whispered. Below. Yes, I
Okay,
said.
so I'm back again.
Crawl till we come to it. But if we don't, keep hidden. See what they are like. We will keep together, said I. He thought, which way shall we go? We must take our chance. We peered this way and that, and very circumspectly.
Okay, so
We
I'm
began
back
to crawl
again,
through
but I
the
can
lower
have a more
jungle,
better view
making so
of
far
what
as we
I'm
could
doing,
judge a circuit, halting now at every
because
waving fungus, at every sound,
I don't have good
intent only
vision.
on the sphere from
That's
which
for
we had
sure.
so foolishly emerged. Ever and again, from out of the earth beneath us came concussions,
Sorry for moving the
beatings,
camera.
strange, inexplicable mechanical sounds.
And
And
my
once,
terrace ain't no
and then
better.
again, we thought we heard
So let's
something,
try this
a
again
faint
with
rattle
Ciara.
and tumult, borne to us through the air. Vantage point to survey the crater. For a long longer, the drying of our throats, that crawling would have been the only quality of a very vivid dream. It was so absolutely unreal. The only element with any touch of reality was those sounds. Picture it to yourself. About us, the dreamlike jungle, with the silent bayonet leaves darting overhead, and the silent, vivid, sun-splashed lichens
I'm
under our
listening
hands
to an
and knees,
audiobook.
waving with the vigor of their
The
growth
first
as the
man
carpet
on the
waves when
moon.
the wind gets beneath it.
To,
Ever
getting
and
ready for
again, one of the
Thanksgiving.
latter
Thanksgiving almost
bulging
here.
and distending under the sun,
Then we got
loomed upon
Christmas.
us. Ever and again, some novel shape and vivid color obtruded. The very cells that built up these plants were as large as my thumb, like beads of colored glass. And all these things were saturated
My
in the
terrace is
unmitigated
bothering
glare of
me.
the sun, were seen against a sky that was
So
bluish black and spangled still, in
if
spite of
and
the
you see me
sunlight,
making like
with a few
mistakes,
surviving stars. Strange.
don't do it.
The very forms and textures
That's
of
the
the
best
stones were
advice.
strange.
Because my
It was
terrace
all
is really
strange. The feeling of one's body was
kicking me.
unprecedented. Every other movement ended in a surprise. The breath sucked thin in one's throat. The blood flowed through one's ears in a throbbing tide. Thud, 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 thud. And ever and again came gusts of turmoil, hammering, the clanging and throb of machinery, and presently the bellowing of great beasts. End of chapter.
I don't even know why I put that there. Don't put that there. I don't know why you did that.
Chapter 11 of The First Man in the Moon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The First Man in the Moon by H.G. Wells. Chapter 11. The Moon Calf Pastures. So we two poor terrestrial castaways, lost in that wild-growing moon jungle, crawled in terror before the sounds that had come upon us. We crawled, as it seemed, a long time before we saw either selenite or mooncalf, though we heard the bellowing and gruntulous noises of these latter continually drawing nearer to us. We crawled through stony ravines, over snow slopes, amidst fungi that ripped like thin bladders at our thrust, emitting a watery humor over a perfect pavement of things like puffballs, and beneath interminable thickets of scrub. And ever more helplessly our eyes sought for our abandoned sphere. The noise of the mooncalves would at times be a vast, flat, calf-like sound. At times it rose to an amazed and wrathy bellowing, and again it would become a clogged, bestial sound, as though these unseen creatures had sought to eat and bellow at the same time. Our first view was but an inadequate transitory glimpse, yet none the less disturbing because it was incomplete. Kavor was crawling in front at the time, and he first was aware of their proximity.
Okay,
He
so
stopped dead, arresting me with a single gesture. A crackling and smashing of the scrub appeared to be advancing bits
I'm gonna use the
directly
same
upon us.
colors with different
And
size
then,
for
as
shading
we
the camera.
squatted close and endeavored to judge the nearness and direction of this noise, came a terrific bellow behind us,
Need shower
so
for it,
close and
so
vehement that the
I'm trying
tops
to
of the
find a
bayonet
plastic
scrub
shop
bent
right here.
before it, and one felt the breath of it hot and moist. And turning about, we saw indistinctly through a crowd of swaying stems the mooncalf's shining sides, and the long line of its back loomed out against the
Here's the
sky.
premier color white.
Of
Like I
course,
said,
it's
you see
hard
that?
for me now to say how much I
Don't
saw
do
at
that.
that time,
I don't
because
even
my
know why you
impressions were
did it.
corrected by subsequent observation. First of all impressions was
Try
its
not to
enormous
smudge
size.
the picture.
The girth of its body was some 4 feet, its length perhaps 200. Its sides rose and fell with its labored breathing. I perceived that its gigantic flabby body lay along the ground, and that its skin was of a corrugated white, dappling into blackness along the backbone. But of its feet we saw nothing. I think also that we saw then the profile, numbered neck, its slobbering omnivorous mouth, its little nostrils,
Okay, so I
tight
get
shut
that down.
eyes. For the mooncalf invariably shuts its
I'm gonna get
eyes
the
in the presence of the
sunflower.
sun. We had a glimpse of a vast red pit as it opened its mouth.
Okay, this
to
the
bleat and bellow
sunflower,
again.
but it needs to be
We
sharpened.
had a breath from the pit, and then the monster heeled over like a ship, dragged forward along the ground, creasing all its leathery skin, rolled again, and so wallowed past us, smashing a path amidst the scrub.
Try not
and
to
was
smudge the
speedily
picture
hidden
once
from our
again.
eyes by the dense interlacings beyond. Another appeared more distantly, and then another, and then, as though he was guiding these animated lumps of provender to their pasture, a selenite came momentarily into ken. My grip upon Cavor's foot became convulsive at the sight of him, and we remained motionless and peering long after he had passed out of our range. By contrast with the mooncalves, he seemed a trivial being.
I can see a lot more belly at this angle, not gonna
He
lie.
was wearing garments of
I
some
can see a
leathery
lot more
substance,
belly.
so that no
Still
portion
having
of his
Tourette's
actual body
problem though.
appeared. But of this,
So I
of
can see a
course, we
lot
were
more belly.
entirely ignorant. He presented himself, therefore, as a compact, bristling creature, having much of the quality of a complicated insect, with web-like tentacles and a clanging arm projecting from his shining cylindrical body case. The form of his head was hidden by his enormous, many-spiked helmet. We discovered afterwards that he used the spikes for prodding refractory mooncalves. And a pair of goggles of darkened glass, set very much at the side, gave a bird-like quality to the metallic apparatus that covered his face. His arms did not project beyond his body case, and he carried himself upon short legs that, wrapped though they were in warm coverings, seemed to our terrestrial eyes inordinately flimsy. They had very short thighs, very
Now,
long shanks, and
before I
little
go
feet.
any further,
In spite
I
of his
want to
heavy-looking clothing, he
put
was
a little
progressing with what would be, from the
shading,
terrestrial point of view,
shading,
very considerable strides.
you
His
know what I
clanging
mean,
arm was
on
busy.
certain areas of
The
the
quality of his
face
motion during
with the
the
same
instant of his
crazy
passing
art,
suggested haste and a certain
sunflower,
anger.
just certain
And
areas,
soon after
just
we
to
had
help
lost
me
sight
out a
of him,
little
we
bit.
heard the bellow of a mooncalf change abruptly into a short, sharp squeal, followed by the scuffle of its acceleration. And gradually that bellowing receded, and then we listened. For a space the moon world was still, but it was some time before we resumed our crawling search for the vanished sphere. When next we saw mooncalves, they were some little distance away from us in a place of tumbled rocks. The less vertical surfaces of the rocks were thick with a speckled green plant, growing in dense mossy clumps, upon which these peering out at them and looking round for a second glimpse of the selenite. They lay against their food like stupendous slugs, huge, greasy hulls, eating greedily and noisily, with a sort of sobbing avidity. They seemed monsters of mere fatness, clumsy and overwhelmed to a degree that would make a Smithfield ox seem a model of agility. With chewing mouths and eyes closed, together with the appetizing sound of their munching, made up an effect of animal enjoyment that was singularly stimulating to our empty frames. Hogs, said Cavour with unusual passion. Disgusting hogs. After one glare of angry envy, crawled off through the bushes to our right. I stayed long enough to see that the speckled plant was quite
I'm gonna
hopeless
use
for
this
human
toasted
nourishment,
toffee,
then crawled after it,
crazy art
nibbling a
toasted
quill of
toffee.
it between my
And I'm
teeth.
gonna go over it lightly
Presently we were
first,
arrested again by the proximity of a selenite, and this time we were able to
just to
observe
see
him more
what I'm coming
exactly.
out with.
Now we could see that the selenite covering was indeed clothing, and not a sort of crustacean integument. He's quite similar in his costume to the former one we had glimpsed, except that ends of something like wadding were protruding from his neck, and he stood on a promontory of rock and moved his head this way and that, as though he was surveying the crater. We lay quite still, fearing to attract his attention if we moved, and after a time he turned about and disappeared. We came upon another drove of moon calves bellowing up a ravine, and then we passed over a place of sounds of beating machinery, as
I'm
if some
trying to
huge
tone it down
all-industry
somewhat.
came near the surface there. And while these sounds were still about us, we came to the edge of a great open space, perhaps 200 yards in diameter and perfectly level. Save for a few lichens that advanced from its margin, this space was bare, and presented a powdery surface of a dusty yellow color. We were afraid to strike out across this space, but as it presented less obstruction to our crawling than the scrub, we went down upon it and began very circumspectly to skirt its edge. For a little while the noises from below ceased, and everything, save for the faint stir of the growing vegetation, was very still. Then abruptly there began an uproar, louder, more vehement, and nearer than any we had so far heard. Of a certainty it came
My
from below.
hands.
Instinctively we crouched as flat as we could, ready for a prompt plunge into the thicket beside us. Each knock and throb seemed to vibrate through our bodies. Louder grew this throbbing and beating, and then irregular vibration increased until the whole moon world seemed to be jerking and pulsing. "Cover," whispered Cavour, and I turned towards the bushes. At that instant came a thud like the thud of a gun, and then a thing happened. It still haunts me in my dreams. I had turned my head to look at Cavour's face, and thrust out my hand in front of me as I did so. And my hand met nothing. I plunged suddenly into a bottomless hole. My chest hit something hard, and I found myself with my chin on the edge of an unfathomable abyss that had suddenly opened beneath me. My hand extended stiffly into the void. The whole of that flat circular area was no more than a gigantic lid that was now sliding sideways from off the pit it had covered into a slot prepared for it. Had it not been for Cavour, I think I should have remained rigid, hanging over this margin and staring into the enormous gulf below, until at last the edges of the slot scraped me off and hurled me into its depths. But Cavour had not received the shock that had paralyzed me. He had been a little distance from the edge when the lid first opened, and perceiving the peril that held me helpless, gripped my legs and pulled me backwards. I came into a sitting position, crawled away from the edge for a space on all fours, then staggered up and ran after him across the thundering, quivering sheet of metal. It seemed to be swinging open with a steadily accelerated velocity, and the bushes in front of me shifted sideways as I ran. I was none too soon. Cavour's back vanished amidst the bristling thicket, and as I scrambled up after him, the monstrous valve came into its position with a clang. For a long time, we lay panting, not daring to approach the pit. But at last, very cautiously, and bit by bit,
So now I want to try to get some gray.
The bushes about us creaked and swayed with the force of a breeze that was blowing down the shaft. We could see nothing at first except smooth vertical walls descending at last into an impenetrable black. And then, very gradually, we became aware of a number of very faint
I'm gonna
and little
go
lights
put some
going
gray
to
around
and fro.
here,
For a time, that stupendous gulf
but
of
I might
mystery
need
held us so that we
the
forgot even
Camille
our
color
sphere.
gray. Let me see.
In time, as we grew more accustomed to the darkness, we could make out very small, dim, elusive shapes moving about among those needle-point illuminations.
I ain't got no patience to try to find it, so let me just go
Understanding
do
so
what I need
little
to
that
do.
we could find no words to say. We could distinguish nothing that would give us a clue to the meaning of the faint shapes we saw. What can it be? I asked. What can it be? The engineering. They must live in these caverns during the night and come out during the day. Cavor, I said. Can they be that it was something like men? That was not a man. We dare risk nothing. We dare do nothing until we find the sphere. We can do nothing
Now we use
until
the
we find
crazy
the
all
sphere.
black.
He assented with a groan and stirred himself to move. He stared about him for a space, sighed, and indicated a direction. We struck out through the jungle. For a time we crawled resolutely, then with diminishing vigor. Presently, among great shapes of flabby purple, there came a noise of trampling and cries about us. We lay close, and for a long time the sounds went to and fro, and very near. But this time we saw nothing. I tried to whisper to Cavor that I could hardly go without food much longer, but my mouth had become too dry for whispering. Cavor, I said, I must have food. He turned a face full of dismay towards me.
Now we use this
It's a
Premier
case
color
for
white
holding out,
and
he
go
said.
over certain
But
areas
I
on her
must,
too.
I said, and look at my lips. I've been thirsty some time. If only some of that snow had remained. It's clean gone. We're driving from Arctic to tropical at the rate of a degree a minute. I gnawed my hand. The sphere, he said. There is nothing for it but the sphere. We roused ourselves to another spurt of crawling. My mind ran entirely on edible things, on the hissing profundity of summer drinks. More particularly, I craved for beer. I was haunted by the memory of a 16-gallon cask that had swaggered in my limpy cellar. I thought of the adjacent larder, and especially of steak and kidney pie. Tender steak and plenty of kidney, and rich, thick gravy between. Ever and again I was seized with fits of hungry yawning. We came to flat places overgrown with fleshy red things, monstrous coralline growths.
Okay, so
As we
now
pushed
I
against
am
them, they
going to
snapped and
get
broke.
the
I noted the
Crayola
quality
white
of the
and
broken
chocolate.
surfaces.
Wait,
The
before I
compounded
do
stuff
that,
certainly looked of a biteable texture. Then it seemed
I
to me that it
forget.
smelt rather well. I picked up a fragment and sniffed at it. Cavor, I said in a hoarse undertone. He glanced at me with his face screwed up. Don't, he said. I put down the
Alright, now I'm
fragment,
going to
and
use
we
that
crawled
was the
on through
Premier
this tempting
color
fleshiness for a space.
berry that I
Cavor,
had put
I
down
asked.
just for a little
Why
blush,
not?
but now I'm going to put down the white,
Poison,
the
I heard him
crazy
say,
art
but I
white to
did not
help
look
blend
round.
everything out.
We crawled some way before I decided. I'll chance it, said I. He made a belated gesture to prevent me. I stuffed my mouth full. He crouched, watching my face, his own twisted into the oddest expression. It's good, I said. Oh, Lord, he cried. He watched me munch, his face wrinkled between desire and disapproval, then suddenly succumbed to appetite and began to tear off huge mouthfuls. For a time we did nothing but eat. The stuff was not unlike a terrestrial mushroom, only it was much laxer in texture, and as one swallowed it, it warmed the throat. At first we experienced a mere mechanical satisfaction in eating. Then our blood began to run warmer, and we tingled at the lips and fingers, and then new and slightly irrelevant ideas came bubbling up in our minds. It's good, said I. Infernally good. What a home for our surplus population. Our poor surplus population. And I broke off another large portion. It filled me with a curiously benevolent satisfaction that there was such good food in the moon. The depression of my hunger gave way to an irrational exhilaration. The dread and discomfort in which I had been living vanished entirely. I perceived the moon no longer as a planet from which I most earnestly desired the means of escape, but as a possible refuge from human destitution. I think I forgot the selenites, the moon calves, the lid, and the noises completely so soon as I'd eaten that fungus. Cavour replied to my third repetition of my surplus population remark with similar words of approval. I felt that my head swam, but I put this down to the stimulating effect of food after a long fast. Excellent discovery,
So
yours,
I did
Cavour,
that.
said
I think I'm ready to color her
Second
hair
only to
before I
the
go
data.
any more further. Or
What
her
do you mean?
skin. I'm ready to
Asked
color
Cavour
her.
at him, shocked
Look,
at his suddenly hoarse
I
voice,
don't know
and
what
by
to
the
call
madness
that
of his
color and that
articulation.
shade.
It
I'm
occurred
trying
to
to
me in a
make it out.
flash that he was intoxicated, possibly by the fungus. It also occurred to me that he erred in imagining that he had discovered the moon. He had not discovered it, he had only reached it. I tried to lay my hand on his arm and explain this to him, but the issue was too subtle for his
On the
brain.
root part, I'm
It
gonna
was
use
also
this
unexpectedly
crazy art
difficult
black
to
on the root
express.
part.
After a
But then I'm
momentary
just gonna
attempt to understand me,
move
I
from there.
remember wondering if the fungus had made my eyes as fishy as his. He set off upon some observations on his own account. We are, he announced with a solemn hiccup, the creatures of what we eat and drink. He repeated this, and as I was now in one of my subtle moods, I determined to dispute it. Possibly I wandered a little from the point, but Cavour certainly did not attend at all properly. He stood up as well as he could, putting a hand on my head to steady himself, which was disrespectful, and stood staring about him, quite devoid now of any fear of the moon beings. I tried to point out
I'm gonna
that this
try
was
this
dangerous for
crazy
some
art
reason
brown
that was not
and go
perfectly
over
clear
it.
to me.
Just put down a
But the
little,
word
just a little
dangerous
shade
had
darker.
somehow got mixed with indiscreet and came out rather more like
Just a shade, not a
injurious
whole
than either.
lot, just a shade.
And after an attempt to disentangle them, I resumed my argument, addressing myself principally to the unfamiliar but attentive chorus of growths on either side. I felt that it was necessary to clear up this confusion between the moon and a potato at once. I wandered into a long parenthesis on the importance of precision of definition in argument. I did my best to ignore the fact that my bodily sensations were no longer agreeable. In some way that I have now forgotten, my mind was led back to projects of colonization. We must annex this moon, I said. There must be no shilly-shally. This is part of the white man's burthen. Cavour, we're means satraps.
Okay, so I
Empire
did
Caesar
it.
never trapped. In all the newspapers,
I'm gonna
Gabaritia, Bedfordicia,
put some brown up here.
Limited. Mean unlimited. Practically. Certainly, I was intoxicated. I embarked upon an argument to show the infinite benefits our arrival would confer on the moon. I involved myself in a rather
But I'm gonna
difficult
go
proof
and
that the
use the
arrival of
sunflower
Columbus
for the
was,
rest of her
on
hair.
the whole, beneficial to America. I found
Now,
I
if
had
it come out
forgotten the
pretty
line of
good,
argument I had
I might
intended to
go and
pursue,
just put it on her
and
whole
continued
head.
to repeat, similar to Columbus, to fill up time. From that point, my memory of the action of that abominable fungus becomes confused. I remember vaguely that we declared our intention of standing no nonsense from any confounded insects, that we decided it ill became men to hide shamefully upon a mere satellite, that we equipped ourselves with huge armfuls of the fungus, whether for missile purposes or not, I do not know. And heedless of the stabs of the bayonet scrub, we started forth into the sunshine. Almost immediately we must have come upon the Selenites. There were 6 of them, and they were marching in single file over a rocky place, making the most remarkable piping and whining sounds. They all seemed to become aware of us at once. All instantly became silent and motionless, like animals, with their faces turned toward us. For a moment I was sobered. Insects, murmured Cavour. Insects. And they think I'm going to crawl about on my stomach, on my vertebrated stomach. Stomach, he repeated slowly as though he chewed the indignity. Then Then suddenly, with a sort of fury, he made 3 vast strides and leaped towards them. He leaped badly. He made a series of somersaults in the air, rolled right over them, and vanished with an enormous splash amidst the cactus splatters. What the Selenites made of this amazing, and to my mind, undignified eruption from another planet, I have no means of guessing. I seem to remember the sight of their backs as they ran in all directions, but I am not sure. All these last incidents before oblivion came are vague and faint in my mind. I know I made a step to follow Cavour, and tripped and fell headlong among the rocks. I was, I am certain, suddenly and
I use the razor toasted
I seem
toffee.
to remember a violent struggle and being gripped by metallic clasps. My next clear recollection is that we were prisoners at we knew not what depths beneath the moon's surface. We were in darkness amidst strange, distracting noises. Our bodies were covered with scratches and bruises, and our heads racked with pain. End of chapter.
I think I might want to change it to orange. I don't know. I
Chapter
love
12 of The First Men in the Moon.
experimenting,
This is a
you know.
LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to
I
volunteer,
love
please visit
experimenting.
LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The First Man in the Moon by H.G. Wells. Chapter 12, The Selenite's Face. I found myself sitting crouched together in a tumultuous darkness. For a long time I could not understand where I was, nor how I had come to this perplexity. I thought of the cupboard into which I had been thrust at times when I was a child, and then of a very dark and noisy bedroom in which I had slept during an illness. But these sounds about me were not the noises I had known, and there was a thin flavor in the air like the wind of a stable. Then I supposed we must still be at work upon the sphere, and that somehow I had got into the cellar of Cavour's house. I remembered we had finished the sphere, and fancied I must still be in it, traveling through space. Cavour, I said, cannot we have some light? There came no answer. Cavour, I insisted. I was answered by a groan. My head, I heard him say. My head. I attempted to press my hands to my brow, which ached, and discovered they were tied together. This startled me very much. I brought them up to my mouth.
Now I'm gonna get the
cold smoothness
crazy
of
all
them.
white. I'm gonna try to blend out her hair with it.
I tried to separate my legs and made out that they were separately fastened, and also that I was fastened to the ground by a much thicker chain about the middle of my body.
It need to
I
be
was
sharp
more
and
frightened
hard.
than I had yet been by anything at all our strange experiences. For a time I tugged silently at my bonds. Cavour, I cried out sharply, why am I tied? Why have you tied me hand and foot? I haven't tied you, he answered. It's the Selenites. The Selenites. My mind hung on that for a space. Then my memories came back to me. The snowy desolation, the thawing of the air, the growth of the plants, our strange hopping and crawling among the rocks and vegetation of the crater. All the distress of our frantic search for the sphere returned to me. Finally, the opening of the great lid that covered the pit. Then, as I strained to trace our later movements down to our present plight, the pain in my head became intolerable. It came to an insurmountable barrier, an obstinate blank. Cavour. Yes. Where are we? How should I know? Are we dead? What nonsense. They've got us then. He made no answer but a grunt. The lingering traces of the poison seemed to make him oddly irritable. What do you mean to do? How should I know what to do? Oh, very well, said I, and became silent. Presently I was roused from a stupor. Oh, Lord, I cried. I wish you'd stop that buzzing. It relapsed into silence again, listening to the dull confusion of noises like the muffled sounds of a street or factory that filled our ears. I could make nothing of it. My mind pursued first one rhythm and then another, and questioned it in vain. But after a long time I became aware of a new and sharper element, not mingling with the rest, but standing out, as it were, against that cloudy background of sound. It was a series of relatively very little definite sounds, tappings and rubbings, like a loose spray of ivy against a window, or a bird moving about upon a box. We listened and peered about us, but the darkness was a velvet pall. There followed a noise like the subtle movement of the wards of a well-oiled lock. And then
So I'm
there
gonna get
appeared
this
before me,
premiere,
hanging as it
not
seemed
the
in an
premiere,
immensity
but the
of black,
toasted
a thin, bright
crazy
line.
or again, go over here
Look,
again.
whispered Cavour very softly. What is it? I don't know. We stared. The thin, bright line became a band, and broader and paler. It took upon itself the quality of a bluish light falling upon a whitewashed wall. It ceased to be parallel-sided. It developed a deep indentation on one side. I turned to remark this to Cavour, and was amazed to see his ear in a brilliant illumination, all the rest of him in shadow. I twisted my head round as well as my bonds would permit. Cavour, I said, it's behind. His ear vanished, gave place to an eye. Suddenly the crack that had been emitting the light broadened out, and revealed itself as the space of an opening door. Beyond was a sapphire vista. In the doorway stood a grotesque outline silhouetted against the curtain. We both made convulsive efforts to turn, and failing, sat staring over our shoulders at this. My first impression was of some clumsy quadruped with lowered head. Then I perceived it was the slender, pinched body and short and extremely attenuated bandy legs of a Selenite, with his head depressed between his shoulders. He was without the helmet and body covering they wear upon the exterior. He was a blank, black figure to us, but instinctively our imaginations supplied features to his very human outline. I, at least, took it instantly that he was somewhat hunchbacked, with a high forehead and long features. He came forward 3 steps, and paused for a time. His movement seemed absolutely noiseless. Then he came forward again. He walked like a bird. His feet fell one in front of the other. He stepped out of the ray of light that came
Now
through the
get the
doorway, and it seemed as
crazy
though he
or black.
vanished altogether in the
Just go over
shadow.
the little areas.
For a moment my eyes saw him in the wrong place, and then I perceived him standing facing us both in the full light. Only the human features I had attributed to him were not there at all. Of course I ought to have expected that, only I didn't. It came to me as an absolute, for a moment an overwhelming shock. It seemed as though it wasn't a face, as though it must needs be a mask, a horror, a deformity, that would presently be disavowed or explained. There was no nose, and the thing had dull, bulging eyes at the side. In the silhouette I had supposed they were ears. There were no ears. I have tried to draw one of these heads, but I cannot. There was a mouth, downwardly curved like a human mouth, and a face that stares ferociously. The neck on which the head was poised was jointed in 3 places, almost like the short
When you
joints
go
in the
over
leg
with
of a
the
crab.
black,
The joints
don't
of the
press
limbs I
on it,
could not
just
see, because of the
glide it.
puttee-like straps in which they were swathed, and which formed the only clothing the being wore. There the thing was, looking at us. At the time my mind was taken up by the mad impossibility of the creature. I suppose he also was amazed, and with more reason perhaps for amazement than we. Only, confound him, he did not show it. He did at least know what had brought about this meeting of incompatible
And I'm gonna get
creatures.
the crazy
But conceive
sweet
how it would
art
seem to
toasted
decent
again,
Londoners, for
and
example,
just
to
glide
come
on
upon a
certain
couple of
parts of the
living
area of
things
the
as big as
Ciara.
men and absolutely unlike any other earthly animals, careering about among the sheep in Hyde Park. It must have taken him like that.
I'm glad I did move over here because I really
We were
couldn't see.
bound hand and foot, fagged and filthy.
Okay, so I
Our
did all
beards 2
that.
inches long, our faces scratched and
And
bloody.
all that I need to do now
Or
is
you
the
must imagine in
eyebrows.
his
Let me see. The
knickerbockers,
eyebrows almost
torn
kind
in
of like the
several
color of the
places
hair.
by the bayonet scrub, his Jaeger's shirt and old cricket cap, his wiry hair wildly disordered, a tail to every quarter of the heavens. In that blue light his face did not look red but very dark. His lips and the drying blood upon my hands seemed black.
So I'm using the...
If possible, I was in a worse plight than he, on account of the yellow fungus into which I had jumped.
I'm
Our
using
jackets were
the
unbuttoned, and our
Crazy
shoes had
Out
been taken
Sunflower
off and
and the
lay at our
Crazy Out
feet,
Toasted
and we were sitting
Coffee.
with our
And
backs
now I'm
to
going to
this
use the
weird
Crazy
bluish
Art
light, peering at such a
Black.
monster as Dürer might have invented. Cavour broke the silence, started to speak, went hoarse, and cleared his throat. Outside began a terrific bellowing, as if a moon calf were in trouble.
And she had
It ended
peach
in a shriek,
lipstick on.
and
I know I
everything
got
was still
peach up
again.
here.
Presently
says
the
pink.
selenite turned about, flickered into the shadow, stood for a moment retrospective at the door,
This
and
is
then
peach.
closed it on us. And once more we were
I think
in
she
that
had peach
murmurous
enough for
mystery
sure.
of darkness into which we had awakened. End of chapter.
Ciara always tried to have like a natural makeup look going on. Now I'm gonna get this Premier
Chapter
color white
13 of The
and
First
go
Man
over
in the
her
Moon.
lips with it.
This is a LibriVox recording. All
The
LibriVox
bobbin
recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina.
Now I'm
The
gonna get
First Man in
the
the Moon
Crazy
by
Art
H.G. Wells. Chapter 13.
sunflower and go certain
Mr.
parts to
Cavour
lip
makes some
with it.
suggestions.
Just around the lips, really, basically.
For a time, neither of us spoke. To focus together all the things we had brought upon ourselves seemed
And
beyond
now
my
I'm gonna
mental
get
powers.
the Crazy
It got
Art
us, I said at last.
toasted
It
toffee,
was that fungus.
but I'm gonna lightly
Well,
go around the
if I
lips.
hadn't eaten it, we should have
Lightly.
fainted and starved. We might have found the spear. I lost my temper at
And
his persistence and
the middle
swore to
part.
myself. For a time, we hated one another in silence. I drummed with my fingers on the floor between my knees and gritted the links of my fetters together. Presently, I
Now
was
to go
forced
the
to
top
talk
part of her
again.
lips with it.
What do you make of it, anyhow? I asked humbly.
Okay, so I did
They
that.
were
Now I
reasonable
want to
creatures. They can make
um,
things and do things.
color in her shirt.
Those lights we saw.
I'm going to
He
use the
stopped.
Crazy
It
Art
was clear he could make nothing of
black.
it. When he spoke again, it was to confess. After all, they are more human than we had a right to expect. I suppose. He stopped irritatingly. Yes, I suppose anyhow. On any planet where there is an intelligent animal, it will carry its brain case upward and have hands and walk direct. Presently he broke away in another direction. We are some way in, he said. I mean, perhaps a couple of 1,000 feet or more. Why? It's cooler, and our voices are so much louder. That faded quality is altogether gone, and the feeling in one's ears and throat. I had not noted that, but I did now. We must be some depths. A mile even we may be, inside the moon. We never
Okay,
thought
I
of
got
a
that
world
down.
inside the moon.
And
No. How could we?
I want to
We
still
might have
put
done.
just a little
Only
bit
one
underneath
gets
her
into habits
eyes.
of mind. He thought for a time. Now, he said, it seems such an obvious thing. Of course, the moon must be enormously cavernous, with an atmosphere within and at the center of its caverns, the sea.
This is the Crazy Art white.
One knew that the moon had a lower specific gravity than the Earth. One knew that it had little air or water outside. One knew, too, that it was sister planet to the Earth, and that it was unaccountable that it should be different in composition. The inference that it was hollow pretty sequence of reasoning. Yes, he said. Kepler with his Sylvani was right after all. I wish you had taken the trouble to find that out before we came, I said. He answered nothing, buzzing to himself softly as he pursued his thoughts. My temper was going.
And then I want
What do
to
you
get the
think has
Premier
become of
Color
this fear
Black
anyhow? I asked.
if I can
Lost,
find
he
it.
said, like a man who
Okay,
answers
yeah,
an
right here.
uninteresting question. Among those plants? Unless they find it.
The Premier Color
And
Black and
then,
Gold, her eyes
how can
with
I
it.
tell? Code 4, I said with a sort of hysterical bitterness. Things look bright for my company. He made no answer. Good Lord, I exclaimed. Just think of all the trouble we took to get
Now
into
we
this
get this
pickle.
crazy
What
white.
did we come for? What are we after? Right,
And go over
much.
with the
We ought to have
eyes with
started
it.
the little things first. It was you proposed the moon, those Cavorite spring blinds. I am certain we could have worked them for terrestrial purposes. Certain. Did you really understand what I proposed? A steel cylinder. Rubbish, said Cavour. We ceased to converse. For a time, Cavour kept up a broken monologue without much help from me.
Okay, and I'm gonna go back over
If they find
like little
it,
details with the crazy
if they
art.
find it, what will they do with it? Well, that's a question. It may be
Toasted
that's the
toffee.
question. They won't understand it anyhow. If they understood that sort of thing, they would have come long since to the earth. Would they? Why shouldn't they? But they would have said something. They couldn't keep their hands off such a possibility. No, but they will examine it. Clearly they are intelligent and inquisitive. They will examine it, get inside it, trifle with the studs. Off. That would mean the moon for us for all the rest of our lives. Strange creatures, strange knowledge. As for strange knowledge, said I,
And
language failed me. Look here, Bedford, said Cavour.
I feel like
You
I'm
came on this
missing a
expedition of
color,
your
but I
own
just
free
don't know
will.
what.
You said to me, call it prospecting. There's always risk in prospecting, especially when you do it unarmed and without thinking out every possibility. I was so taken up with this fear. The thing rushed on us and carried us away. Rushed on me, you mean? Rushed on me just as much. How was I to know when I set to work on molecular physics that the business would bring me here? Of all
I'm
places.
gonna try this punky
It's this
glow of
accursed
the skin.
science, I cried.
Just certain parts,
It's
not
the
the whole
very
thing.
devil.
Just
The
gladly
priests and
with the
persecutors
punky.
were right, and the moderns are all wrong.
I think I know what I'm
You tamper
missing.
with it, and it offers you
I'm
gifts.
missing
And directly you take them, it knocks you to
honey.
pieces in some unexpected
I'm missing
way.
honey. That's what I'm
Old
missing.
passions and new weapons. Now
Honey.
it upsets your religion. Now it upsets your
Go
social
over it with
ideas.
the
Now it whirls you off to
with the
desolation
white
and
part.
misery.
But
Anyhow,
this is
it's
the
no
crazy
use your
art punky
quarreling with me
that I'm
now.
using.
These creatures, these Selenites, or whatever we choose to call them,
But I'm missing
got us tied
gold.
hand and foot.
That's what I'm missing. I'm missing gold.
Whatever temper you
And I'm
choose to go
missing,
through with it in,
okay, I say
you will
gold.
have to go through with it.
What
We
else
have
am I
experiences
missing?
before us that will need
I just,
all our
missing certain
coolness.
colors.
He paused as if he required my assent, but I sat sulking. The problem is communication. Gestures, I fear, will
But
be
for
no creatures but men at
Ciara,
monkey's point.
because
That was too obviously
what I
wrong
got?
for me.
Let me see.
Nearly every animal, I cried, points
I
with its
still got
eyes or
this
nose. Cavour
little
meditated
bitty
over that.
gold right here. Let's see.
Yes, he said at last. We don't. There's
And
such
just don't
differences.
press on it.
Such
Just let it glide.
differences. One might, but how can I tell?
Just let it glide with
Their
the
speech, the
gold.
sounds they make, a sort of fluting and piping. I don't see how we are to imitate that. Is it their speech, that sort of thing? They may have different
But
senses.
I'm gonna tell you too,
different
I
means
probably
of
would have pressed
communication.
on it But I'm trying to
Of
say
course,
as
they are
much gold
minds,
as I
and we are
can.
minds. There
So,
must be something in
yeah.
common. Who knows how far we may
And this
not
is all
get
going to
to
do
an
for now.
understanding.
This is my cartoon
Things are
Ciara.
outside us, I said.
Get a
They're more
closer
different from
look.
us than the strangest animals on Earth. They
Here's
are a
Ciara.
different clay. There's the
I
good
don't know if
talking
Ciara
with
her
us.
real name or not.
Have more thought.
But I hope you guys
I don't
enjoyed
see that.
watching.
Where there are minds, they will have something similar. Even though they have been evolved